everyone, welcome back to Keto and Crime and Thought Crime. Today I've got part 1, Killer Kids. This was a difficult one to do. I'll admit that, it really was. It's not something anyone wants to think about. I mean, I know a couple of weeks ago we did the case of Jordan Brown, a young man I believe that was falsely accused and has been exonerated, but most of these kids actually did the crimes they were accused of. So I don't want anybody to say that I'm lenient just because they're kids, but thinking about killer kids is not something any of us want to do. We're going to talk a lot in these next couple of videos. I'm going to cover about 3 to 6 of the more well-known cases in this genre. If you want more, I'm happy to do more. Just let me know down below. But before we dive into that, I want to say a special shout out to my patrons, my channel members. Thank you so much. If you'd like to join them, those links are below. I've also got some cool merch, links below. And in my office setting with the better camera set up, just decided to mix it up a little bit. So let me know, do you prefer the curio cabinet or do you prefer my office setting with the little, holiday and season specific decor behind it? Let me know. I've also got some great new backgrounds, and as soon as I can get my wife to put them up for me, we will have those as well. So anyway, I just felt that this is more cozy, and I happen to have the house alone today, so I just decided I would do it in my office. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump in to Killer Kids. Alright, first, again, we're going to talk a lot about nature versus nurture in this. Is it something in their psyche, in their soul, that causes them to be evil at such a young age, or is it, the product of something that wasn't quite right at home? There's a lot of dispute about that. I remember, I'm a huge classic movie buff, and I remember watching the movie 𝗜𝗍𝗁. It was actually a movie based on a play that was based on a book from the 1950s, and it was about a little girl that murdered for her own gain. She murdered kids, she murdered adults. In the end, her mother tried to kill her and then killed herself, but didn't work out that way. It's a great classic movie. You should definitely check it out, 𝗜𝗍𝗁. I'm sure it's free somewhere. It's probably now a public domain movie, but it's great. You need to watch that. It's a great in-depth discussion about nature versus nurture. And in that movie, whereas some of the people say that evil in a child is definitely something that was taught to them by a parent, the child in this movie, that's not the case. They're just a normal, average, working class family, neither good nor evil, just average people. But then it turns out that, and this spoiler alert, it does turn out that the mother found out during the course of this movie that her parents had kept the fact that she was adopted hidden from her, because her father was a police detective, now retired, that had found her after they had had a shootout with a female serial killer during his career, and they killed her during the course of the shootout, and they found her now orphaned baby in the house that turned out to be now the mother in this particular movie, whom the police officer took pity on because he and his wife could not have children, and they adopted her and raised her and never told her about her origins until this. And so then there's the whole thing. Did Rhoda, the little girl, inherit the tendency to kill from her maternal grandmother, who was a serial killer? Now, like I said, this was all fiction. It was all conjecture. It was actually written by a child psychologist who had written many academic papers on the subject. So nature versus nurture is going to be something that we will discuss in this video. So if you're offended by those kind of discussions, or just don't believe that children can commit these kind of crimes, this is not your video. I highly recommend that you click off now. But we're going to try to have a nice discussion about it. But before we get into the real cases, if you notice the thumbnail, there was a child on there that's a fictitious child from Children of the Corn. And did you think I'm going to put him on the thumbnail and not talk about him? Of course not. So for our first one, we're going to dive in light and talk about the life of Children of the Corn's Isaac Chroner. Here we go. Isaac Chroner from Children of the Corn, better known as the child preacher, the one that led the children in the fictitious cult in the movie down the primrose path to worshiping He who walks behind the rose. We first meet him in the 1983-84 classic. He is already a pretty well-known preacher within the town of Gatlin. He is the one that taught the children about this mythical He who walks behind the rose, and inevitably got them to murder all of the adults in town, and now control the town. And they worship this mysterious entity that lives in the cornfield that dictates that you should be sacrificed to him at the age of 19 at the beginning of the film. And so there's no one over the age of 19 in the movie, and they are required to intermarry and breed young so that there's more children to kind of replenish the cult. The only adult that they allow to live is a owner of a gas station and mechanic shop just on the outside of town, because he orders fuel and things like that that are useful to them. But in this movie, 𝗂𝗂𝘁𝗍, who we know as the tall Outlander one, I'll drop him here, he decides to kill this adult because he fears that he knows too much against Isaac's orders. But who is this mysterious Isaac Chroner, the kid with the evil look, short, just demonic looking? Who is he? Well, we don't find out his exact origins until Children of the Corn 666, Isaac's Return, but we find out that it's a pretty interesting kind of background. Also, along these lines, this is for the geeks in the audience, I have met, he was actually played by an actor by the name of John Franklin, who was actually 24 years old, or 23 years old at the time he made that movie, but he had a growth hormone deficiency that made him look 12 years old. And he and the gentleman that played 𝗂𝗂𝘁𝗶𝗰, the other well-known cult classic character from the film Courtney Gaines, I have met both of these gentlemen at Comic Cons and horror cons, because yes, I'm that kind of geek, I admit it. And let me tell you, they are among the nicest people you would ever meet. I have met so many horror movie villains, and the actors and actresses that portray them are usually the nicest, most down-to-earth people that you would ever want to meet. The people that do horror films, even though they kind of cover outlandish and almost grotesque subjects, they are the nicest ever. I don't know why that type of genre actually attracts nice people to actually portray them, but I found that to be the case. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But Isaac Chroner was born in the 1950s in Nebraska. His parents, who were tent revival preachers, Pentecostal tent revival preachers, discovered at a very early age that Isaac had a talent for preaching, that he was very charismatic, he seemed to have the Spirit, and as a result, he became kind of a novelty within the Pentecostal, tent revival circuit, which we've talked about when we talked about the prosperity gospel in our televangelist things. That's a very common thing. These tent revivals are often where these people start. And Isaac's parents realized what a money-making scheme a young child preacher could be. They used all the same tricks of the trade as every other, performing minister on this circuit did, but because he was a child, he made more money for them. And so they decided they wanted to keep him a kid, because as he grows up, becomes a man, novelty kind of wears off, and an adult preacher is not as kitschy as a child preacher. So, according to Children of the Corn, 666, Isaac's Return, they started feeding him quicksilver, also known as mercury, to stunt the poor child's growth. Well, you know what happens with mercury? You've heard the term mad as a hatter? Well, lots of hat makers dealt with mercury in their trade, and that this also was kind of a disease among funeral directors for a long time, until they took the levels of mercury, out of embalming solution, as well as took it, made sure that the dental fixtures and things in your mouth that contain mercury, that when you're kind of working with those as an embalmer, or even when you're cremating them, you can suck up those fumes and get mercury poisoning, which will literally make you mad as a hatter. So that's what happened to Isaac. And if you want more information on that, I did a video on the tri-state crematory, kind of what happened to that dude. I'll link it up here. Mercury poisoning, you don't want to mess with it. But they fed Isaac in his food quicksilver or mercury, stunting his growth to keep him the resemblance of a child, but also made him mad as a hatter. And so, of course, he felt a lot of, anger toward his parents, as you would. And it was at that time that he started feeling, turning to the dark side, so to speak. And it was then that he was actually possessed or taunted in the Midwestern corn rows by an ancient agricultural god known as He Who Walks Behind the Rows, to become the purveyor of his cult. And leap forward to Children of the Corn, he was doing just fine until Peter Horton and Linda Hamilton messed that up. But anyway, that is the origin of Isaac Chroner. And for all my horror movie geeks out there, did you really think I was going to put him on the thumbnail without actually mentioning him? No, because I like to keep it real here. And I'm a geek, and I'm going to slide in horror movie references whenever I can. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed that. And with that, we're going to jump into the first of our real-life child killers. And we're not going very far from Isaac Chroner. We're staying in the state of Nebraska. Let's talk about the real-life inspiration for the movie Natural Born Killers that starred Juliette Lewis and Woody Harrelson. Let's jump into it. I'm talking about Charles Starkweather and Caril and Fugate. So let's talk about them, shall we? Remember, these are the real-life inspirations for the movie Natural Born Killers. Charles Starkweather was born not far from the fictional town of Gatlin, Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska. He was the third of 7 children of Guy and Helen Starkweather. They were an average working-class blue-collar family. They're in the Midwest. Charles, the father, was a carpenter, but he was often unemployed due to suffering from acute rheumatoid arthritis in his hands. So somebody that works with their hands having rheumatoid arthritis is not exactly good for business, as you can expect. So he had long periods of unemployment, which caused the family to fall behind in finances. Helen, his mother, did work as a waitress to try to supplement their income. Young Charles did attend Saratoga Elementary School there in Lincoln, along with Irving Junior High School and Lincoln High School. In stark contrast to the rest of his family and the other families' memories of their growing up, Charles Starkweather said that he hated his entire time at school. He hated his home life. He had a mild birth defect known as 𝗳𝗂𝘃, which caused his legs to be misshapen. And he also had a severe speech impediment, which led him to be the target of constant bullying and teasing. Now, I know that I suffered through a lot of bullying and teasing as a kid. I had thick glasses. I still have thick glasses, thank goodness for advanced lens thinning. But I'm severely nearsighted, so I had very thick Coke bottle glasses as a kid. I was always the fat kid, and I kind of looked like a boy. Let's face it, I had a kind of an odd shape, and I always wore my hair short. So I did look like a boy. And as a result, yeah, I was teased a lot. So, and there were many times I did not want to go to school because of that. You know, in elementary school and junior high, it was teasing. And then when you get to high school, it kind of turns away from being teasing a little bit, and it's just isolation. I was kind of one of those lone geeks that kind of stayed to herself. So I can empathize with what Charles is talking about here, though that's not an excuse for what he ended up doing. But just keep that in mind, that he was mercilessly teased in school, kind of isolated in high school, and on top of that, he had a family background with a large family with not much income coming in. So poverty would also play a part here. And also remember, Starkweather was going to high school during the 50s, so he was very much of the baby boomer generation, or even the traditionalist generation, because born before 1945, so this was way before all of the rules we have about bullying and things now. So as a result, he did not do well in school. He was not a good student, except in gym, because he found that if he worked out a lot and built up his stamina, he could have the physical prowess to kind of beat off the bullies that were tormenting him. So he really excelled at gym and at sports, but when it comes to academics, he was just kind of so-so. But he had two different personalities, it seemed. His lifelong friend, Bob Van Bush, would later say that he was actually one of the nicest guys you would ever want to meet. If he liked you, he liked you. He would literally give you his kidney. He was that kind of person. But if anyone wronged him or he took a disliking to them, watch out, because he had no qualms about doing you physical harm up to killing you. I mean, he was that, as we will find out, he was wired that way. And especially if a person was bigger than him, and also he kind of sized him up as a threat, he would literally find a way to chop him down to size, so to speak. And if you read, this almost sounds like sociopathic behavior, because sociopaths like Dexter, in the TV show Dexter, they are very loyal, very loving to the people in their lives, but when it comes to the rest of society, they have no feeling toward them whatsoever. So he was, in my opinion, very much a sociopath. And so, unfortunately, he also got hooked up with another sociopath, because in 1956, 18-year-old Starkweather was introduced by her older sister to 13-year-old Caril and Fugate. However, they did not meet at school. Charles had already dropped out of school by that time and was working at a local Western Union newspaper warehouse, but it was close to Whittier Junior High, where Fugate was a student. And he took an instant shining to her. Remember, this is the 50s, so, you know, older man, underage girl, older woman, underage guy. Not really a whole lot of rules pertaining to that. I mean, my grandmother, you know, was married off at age 13. So, those rules didn't exist in those days, in that day and age, guys and girls. So, yeah, he began, because of his working hours, he began to visit Fugate every day. After school, they would hang out, and they struck up, of course, a relationship. Now, his likability at school versus work, day and night. He did not get along well with his coworkers. His bosses said he was a very, for the lack of a better word, the word they used was dumb. He was a very dumb person. He seemed very dense. They would often have to tell him to do things 2 or 3 times before he would do it. He was not a very good worker. And he also wasn't very responsible. He was teaching Fugate to drive, and so he would allow her to drive his dad, Guy's 1949 Ford. She was unlicensed, and his father had actually allowed him to borrow the car to go back and forth to work, and she actually crashed it one day into another car because Guy Starkweather was the registered owner. He had to pay the damages rendered to the other person's car. This is before insurance. And he got so angry with his son, he ended up throwing him out of the house. And it was at this time the almost 19-year-old Charles Starkweather actually moved into town into his own place with some roommates, quit his job at the Western Union warehouse, and started working for the city of Lincoln as a garbage collector, earning minimum wage at that time, which was less than $1 an hour. And it was then he discovered a love for the nihilistic worldview. Nihilism is the belief that in a complete apathetic look at the world. Life is meaningless. There's no greater meaning, and basically your lot in life was already predetermined. And that's what Charles Starkweather started to believe. He believed that he would never be any more than a garbage collector unless he stepped out of the normal boundaries of society. So he started using his time on his garbage routes, plotting bank robberies. He picked up garbage all over the city, so he could definitely knew the ins and outs of all the businesses, when they came in, when money left, when money came in, when they locked their doors, where the locks were. There was no such thing as video cameras in this day and age, so he personally decided that he was going to have to change his own lot in life, combined with his sociopathic tendencies to not care for people unless he had a relationship with them. He basically forged for himself a personal philosophy, which is dead people are all on the same level. That in life, there's socioeconomic classes and statuses, but among dead people, everyone is on a level playing field. And that would feed into his very first murder, which took place on November 30th, 1957. On that day, Starkweather went to a local Lincoln, Nebraska gas station where he attempted to buy a stuffed animal for his girlfriend, Fugate, on credit. At that time, even when I was a kid, in the 80s, when I would go to a 5 and dime store, you could actually open up store credit and just sign a receipt and then pay it off the next month. Well, he wanted to do that. This particular gas station attendant by the name of Robert Colbert did not know him from Adam, did not want to extend him credit for that stuffed animal, and refused to. So Starkweather began to go and come to the gas station many, many times during that day, each time buying candy or soda or something that just cost a few cents, and then attempting to convince Colbert to sell him that same stuffed animal on credit. Again, Colbert refused. So the final time he came back that evening, he had a shotgun. He forced Colbert at shotgun to give him the $100 that was in the cash register, and then kidnapped Colbert, drove him to a remote area in the woods and fields around Lincoln, Nebraska, and was planning to shoot him. Colbert did attempt to fight back. They struggled over the shotgun, but in the end, Starkweather shot Colbert in the head, killing him. He hid the body. There was a huge, police investigation about what had happened to him, but no one ever realized it. Starkweather kept the murder to himself. No one really knows whether he told his girlfriend Fugate at the time. Remember, she's still only 13 years old, so no one really knows whether or not she knew about it, but he did. He was never punished for that murder, at least not then. And finally, on January 21st, 1958, Starkweather went to Fugate's home and attempted to take her away with him. Her mother and stepfather, Velda and Marion Bartlett, attempted to eject him from their home. They did not want him anywhere near their daughter, and as a result, he became enraged and shot both of her parents. And then he strangled and stabbed to death her 2-year-old little sister, Betty Jean Bartlett. Nice guy, huh? He hid the bodies behind the house, and a lot of discrepancies there. Of course, Fugate would later say that she was kidnapped. She was held at gunpoint while her family was murdered, whereas Starkweather would say that she knew about it, was in on it. So, I guess we'll never really know. But in any case, the two of them remained in the house from the 21st to the 27th until Fugate's grandmother became suspicious why she had not heard from her daughter and decided to call the police, and they were able to abscond before the police arrived at the farmhouse. They immediately drove Fugate's step-parents' car to Bennett, Nebraska, where they stopped at the farmhouse owned by 70-year-old August Meyer. They robbed him, shot him and his dog dead, and then continued on down in Meyer's vehicle. Beginning to get worried that they were looking for them, they actually hid Meyer's car in the mud and then kind of acted like they were broken down on the side of the road when two teenagers out on a date, Robert Jensen and Carol King, stopped to give them a ride. Starkweather pulled a gun on them immediately, forcing them to drive them to a local storm cellar. And that is where Starkweather shot the young man, Robert Jensen, in the back of the head. He attempted to rape Carol King, but she managed to fight him off. He became angry with her over that and fatally shot her as well. Starkweather would later say that he did shoot Jensen, but that Fugate shot Carol King because she was angry that Starkweather was sexually attracted to her, but Fugate said she was in the car the entire time. And then the two fled in Jensen's car to continue on their rampage toward a wealthy section of their hometown of Lincoln, Nebraska. Arriving in a wealthy Lincoln, Nebraska suburb, they entered the home of wealthy industrialist Laurel Ward and his wife, Clara. Upon entering the home, they found their maid, 𝗟𝗟𝗁𝗂𝘁𝗶, there along with the family dog, and they quickly killed both of them, Lillian and the family dog. Now, I don't know about you, but in any movie, if you kill an animal, you immediately lose any sense of empathy. I know that's awful that we kind of think like that, but what I think, if you can kill elderly people, children, or animals, you are a true deviant. You are evil to the core. And we've just seen, in the span of a few weeks, him kill a 70-year-old man, a 2-year-old child, and 2 dogs. So, Charles Starkweather is evil. They held up in the home, robbing it, of course. They packed up the family's car, one of the cars that was left there, to make their escape, but they laid in wait for the owners of the home to come home. The wife, Clara Ford, was the first to arrive, and immediately Starkweather threw a knife at her as soon as she entered the family home, killing her instantly. He would later say that Fugate was actually the one that killed her. Again, she denied it. Remember, she's still 13 at this time. And they still waited for Laura Ward to return home and shot and killed him. And then they took his 1956 Packard with all the money and jewelry they could find in the house and then left the state of Nebraska at that time. All of these murders, of course, caused a huge uproar in Lancaster County, Nebraska, because that just didn't happen there. And they started a massive manhunt for whoever did this. The governor at that time, Victor Anderson, contacted the Nebraska National Guard and had them set up roadblocks so that they could, basically have an understanding of who was traveling on the road, as well as local law enforcement. But they never found Starkweather or Fugate, who had long since crossed over into another state. And unfortunately for the people of Wyoming, that was the state of Wyoming. And upon the highway, they happened upon 𝗟𝗏 Collison, who was a traveling salesperson, sleeping in his Buick on the side of the road. And they, just outside the city of Douglas, Wyoming, they stopped. They woke him up, and they shot him at point-blank range. And, of course, Starkweather would claim that Fugate was the trigger-happy person on this trip. She, again, would deny, until the very end, that she ever killed anyone, that she was a hostage. It is true to their M.O. They abandoned the Ward's 1956 car and took Collison's Buick. Unfortunately, it was equipped with a newfangled thing called a parking brake that Starkweather was not aware of, and it caused the engine to seize up and burn out. As you can imagine, if you're driving with a parking brake, it's going to eventually wear your engine out because of the friction. He didn't know what a parking brake was, so it eventually caused the car to stall out. And again, nice Midwesterners, a geologist by the name of Joe Sprinkle, who was working at a nearby Wyoming rock quarry, stopped to help. Starkweather pulled the rifle on him, threatened him. There was a fight, and a Wyoming County Sheriff's deputy by the name of William Romer happened to be driving by at the time this altercation was happening. He threw on his lights, his siren, or actually his siren at that time. This is the 50s. Fugate ran to him, screaming that it's Charles Starkweather. He kidnapped me. He's going to kill me. And it was at that point, Starkweather pushed Sprinkle aside, jumped in his car, and drove off. The sheriff radioed in for help, and 3 deputies, Romer, the local Douglas Police Chief Anal, and another Robert Anzel, and a Converse County Sheriff Department deputy by the name of 𝗟𝗲𝗽𝗀𝗃 gave chase. They were exceeding 100 miles an hour in 1956, so this was quite a chase. Sheriff 𝗟𝗃𝗀𝗃 then fired at Starkweather's car, shattering the windshield and injuring the serial killer. It was at that point that, with the bleeding and the pain, he did pull over and surrender. And the sheriff was later quoted as saying, "The only reason that the sumbitch stopped is because he feared he was going to die. That's the kind of coward he is." So, anyway, they're both arrested and extradited back to Nebraska. And they arrived back in Nebraska in late January 1958. And during their trial, at first, Starkweather told authorities that Fugate was not a willing participant, that he had indeed kidnapped her, but then later on changed her story. She had, for the long time, contended that she was a hostage. But her story at first was kind of nondescript about whether she saw her family murdered or whether she thought they were still alive, and he was threatening to hurt them, that she was a hostage. So her story kind of fluctuated a little bit there too. But bottom line, Judge Harry A. Spencer of Lawrence County, Nebraska, did not believe either of them and sentenced them both. They were only tried for the murder of Jensen, Robert Jensen, the young teenager. They were never tried for the other murders, but Starkweather was actually sentenced to the electric chair. He was executed on June 25th, 1959. That is quick for a death penalty. At 12:04 a.m. He gave no last words and wrote his parents a letter the day before he was executed and said, "Dad, I'm not real sorry for what I did, because for the first time, me and Caril, that's Fugate, have never had more fun." So those were his last words. Fugate was sentenced to life in prison, which she served 17 and a half years of, finally being paroled in June of 1976 and settled under a new name in Lansing, Michigan. Still contending to this day she was a hostage. What do you think? As I said, this was an inspiration for the movie Natural Born Killers, which was kind of a collaboration between writer Quentin Tarantino and co-writer, director Oliver Stone, as well as another writer, David Velaz. It starred Juliette Lewis and Woody Harrelson in the feature roles, with Robert Downey Jr. and Tommy Lee Jones in supporting roles as law enforcement. It is quite a psychedelic trip. It, of course, is highly, highly dramatized. First of all, it's set in a more modern setting with a lot of flash forwards, flashbacks. I think there was some flash sideways. It's a very trippy kind of movie. If you're a Tarantino fan or an Oliver Stone fan, you will love it. But it's not a shot-by-shot depiction. But these two, Charles Starkweather and Caril Fugate, were the inspiration for this movie. Anyway, With that, let's move on to our next evil kid. Eric M. Smith was born January 22nd, 1980 in upstate New York. According to his grandparents, Red and Eddie Wilson, he was a very affectionate child. He would always come in and give them kisses. He was a natural-born clown. However, it was later revealed that Eric Smith had been diagnosed by a psychologist with intermittent explosive disorder. He would basically have violent and unpredictable outbursts with no provocation whatsoever. And as a result, he was noted to have abused animals and had outbursts towards adults. He was bullied in school as a result of his behavior and his kind of, he was a ginger. Gingers get teased a lot. If you're very light-skinned, redhead, freckles, you get teased a lot. I know, I had two cousins that were gingers. Their life was hell in high school. But come to find out that his mother had an epilepsy disorder and had been treated with the now defunct drug tridone, which has been linked to several types of birth defects, including mental disorders. So it's believed that this poor kid never had a chance. And I'm not excusing what he did, because what he did was off the charts. But he would have these explosive outbursts growing up, and his dad was kind of sporadic in getting him the psychiatric treatment that he needed. So it wasn't really treated. It was kind of just there under the surface. And he had very few friends, but the friends that he had, they were pretty close, and he also became close with their parents. And most people saw him, yes, as a troubled kid, but they didn't really fear him until it came to light what had been going on with the animals and other things. But everything kind of came to a head on August 2nd, 1993, when Smith was 13 years old, where he spotted 4-year-old Derek Roby. Now, Derek Roby was by all accounts a very sweet child. He normally attended the local day camp, which was kind of a summer program for kids that were out of school, so that their parents could work and not really have to worry about them. So it was a day camp they would attend during the day and then come home at night. Well, that morning, Derek Roby, who lived only a couple of blocks from the day camp, convinced his mother, Doreen, to let him walk to the day camp instead of her driving him. And she said she was very apprehensive, but decided to let him, because what kind of trouble could he get into just walking a couple of blocks? And so he took his lunchbox, which contained a sandwich, red Kool-Aid, and a banana, that's important later, and walked towards the camp, whereas Doreen went back in and went about her day. It was at that point that Eric, who also attended the camp, was riding his bicycle back from the camp back toward his house, because he had had an outburst there this morning and was basically expelled for the day. So he was already on the verge of one of his explosive episodes where he saw young Roby walking. He lured Roby into a nearby wooded area under the auspice of playing with some toys he had out there, and killed the child with a combination of asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. He also used a stick to do unspeakable things to Derek's little body, which I will not talk about, but you get my drift. He also took the contents of Derek's lunchbox and smashed the sandwich into the ground, smashed the banana into the ground, and then took his thermos of red Kool-Aid and sprayed it over the body, and then left the body there. Of course, when Mom Doreen Roby arrived later that day to pick her child up from home, they told her that he never arrived at the camp, and of course a citywide hunt for young Roby was launched. An investigation began into the murder. They were questioning all the children in the neighborhood, all the children that had attended the day camp, including 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗏, who seemed to actually be very fascinated with the case. He talked to the detectives saying, I want to help you figure this out. And immediately the detectives became suspicious, as did the mom of one of his friends. They were having a sleepover at their house just a few days after the murder, about, August 4th or 5th. And she said that she had heard about what happened with the Kool-Aid and the banana in reference to the body. And she wanted to, being an amateur sleuth herself, she wanted to test Eric's reaction to those things. So she actually went out to a store and purchased red Kool-Aid and bananas, and as well as the stuff to make banana splits for the boys at their sleepover, and came home. She said that she put out, she made the Kool-Aid and she started making the ice cream treats for the boys, and immediately Eric went into a semi-rage saying he hated red Kool-Aid. It reminded him of blood, and he definitely hated bananas, and he liked to smash them whenever he got the chance. And she said in her mind she knew immediately that Eric is the one that killed 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗶𝗃. So she called his parents and had them come pick him up. And sure enough, 2 days later, on August 6th, 𝗟𝗂𝘁𝗃 confessed to his mother and his father that he was the one that killed Derek that day, and that the stick was just a way to make sure he was dead. He did it because he was angry. He was angry at the people at the camp for not believing he was bullied. He was angry at his parents for not believing he was bullied, and he just saw the young innocent child as a target. And during the investigation and the subsequent trial, which he wasn't actually tried until 1994, the entire time of the trial, 𝗂𝘁𝗃 and his parents contended that he was mentally ill and should not be found guilty based on those parameters. However, a judge and jury did not agree with him, and on August 16th, 1994, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. And I assume that was played in the mental health diagnosis and the fact that this was backed up by court-appointed psychologists during the trial. He actually got a lesser sentence than he would if he had been older, I'm sure, because remember, he was 13 at the time of the murder, now 14. And he was actually sentenced to the maximum term, which is life in prison. He served the first 3 years in a juvenile detention center, then transferred to a prison for young, older teens and young adults, and then in 2001 transferred to a full-on state correctional facility in 𝗓𝗏, New York. He has been denied parole 10 times because his psychological evaluations reveal that he's still a very angry young man, and in the sense of public safety, they don't want to let him out. In fact, as of January of 2020 was the last time he was denied. He's coming up for parole again, October of this current year. So we'll see what happens there. He has written an apology letter to the 𝗂𝘁𝗃 family. He has made a public apology many, many times, and is dedicating his life to helping other incarcerated young people learn to read. So he's trying to make some good, I guess, out of his life. But I don't know what to say about this. Him or Starkweather. It seems that maybe both of them were born with the tendencies to kill. And perhaps society's ills actually, the fact they were bullied, they had parents that were a little bit disconnected, maybe led them, maybe triggered whatever was triggered to get them to take action on their already innate feelings. So I think maybe it's nature and nurture in a way. That if you do have those tendencies and just the right perfect storm cues up when it comes to the way you're treated in high school or at home, that can have a tendency to unleash those feelings and cause them to turn to action. So I think it's a combination of the two. What do you guys and gals think? Let me know down below. And with that being said, I'm going to end part 1 of Evil Kids. I will be back tomorrow with part 2. And until next time, keto and grind.